Speaking of parties coming our way, UFC 243, by the way, is just 2 weeks away. I know the next fight on the calendar is UFC Copenhagen, but let's be real. I don't know how you feel about this, Brian. To me, UFC 243's main event, the title unification at middleweight between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker, for me personally, is the most interesting fight that's been booked this year. Any weight class in mixed martial arts. I absolutely love this fight, and I was thinking, like, what really stands out to me about this fight? Like, why do I love it so much? There's a bunch of different ways. I want to get your opinion as well. On this one, I shall say the following. One, simply the cleanliness of the bout. We had this situation where the title was supposed to be unified a long time ago after GSP dropped it, and of course, you had Whittaker was supposed to defend it against Gastelum, but then he drops out. There's just been two titles floating around, this uncertainty been floating around, frankly, for years, quite literally years at this point, about who is the champion. Was St. Pierre going to fight Whittaker, blah, blah, blah.
Even before that, Bisping had hijacked that title, and he's suddenly in London fighting Dan Henderson. I mean, come on.
I get it. So there's been a lot of just who is the best guy at middleweight, and should he fight the next best guy? Because I've told Michael Bisping, you got to go fight Yoel Romero.
I blame Luke Rockhold for all this uncertainty. By the way, keep going.
But anyway, the point being is we finally get the cleanliness of putting that behind us. It just shows, by the way, that when a fighter leaves a weight class or gets stripped of a title and has to give a title back or whatever the mechanism is, that is bad for that weight class. It takes a long time to undo that damage. We just undid the damage at UFC 242 at lightweight with a similar kind of circumstance. That's the first one I'd say. The second one I'd say is you can pick either fighter here, right? These are just the best that MMA has to offer. You have two guys, Brian Campbell, in their youth, but they're prime as well. So they're not too young to be, like, it's not like Rodriguez who's still on the come up. Both of these guys are fully mature physical talents. They have the best that MMA has to offer, not necessarily in every department, but as well-rounded talents. They're literally both championship caliber. It's showing the development of overseas markets. But for me, I'm going to focus on Adesanya for just this one case. You could focus on Robert Whittaker, whoever you'd like to. For me, to watch somebody, I went back and I watched all of his old fights that are in Fight Pass. Even his old Glory kickboxing fights. He doesn't fight in kickboxing. I know it's a different sport, but his striking in kickboxing is not the same as it is now. His wrestling has just gotten dramatically improved in such record time. For me, if he goes and beats Robert Whittaker, it not only solidifies him as the best middleweight in the world, to me it puts him on, not the top, but certainly makes him in a conversation for pound. It would be in a, what would it be, a 18-month, something like that scenario, 16 to 18-month scenario, that it would be the most rapid development I've ever seen of any fighter ever. To watch
even more than John Jones, that leap he made with the quick fights when he went from contender to title.
I don't think he started as far back. He had such great wrestling base, and he actually kind of changed as a fighter in a more simplified way. Whereas I feel like Adesanya has added a little bit of tools. Both have added tools, but there's been a bit of a refinement with John, whereas there was this let's give Batman more tricks kind of thing with Adesanya. No matter which way you want to slice it, MMA fights don't come around like this very often. No. They are very, very, very rare. Soak this one in because there's a million ways to dissect it. What do you like about it most?
I mean, obviously the fight's going to be great for so many different reasons. And watching Adesanya go through hell against Gastelum and stand firm, and you look at what's Whittaker's greatest skill. He's a well-rounded guy who will stand in that pit with you and will dig in and walk through 10 rounds of hell against Romero and stay standing. So you want the potential for gore and action and two guys giving their heart and soul. This is, maybe to back you, the best fight on paper we could see. But for me, it's Adesanya's true crossover star potential. We always try to groom guys and say this guy could be a next big star, but certain guys don't really have all the tools. They don't have the real it. If he wins this fight, I mean, this is the toughest possible test outside of some circus fight with John Jones that you could book for Adesanya. He comes out of here as a global superstar with the ties in the Oceanic region, the ties in Africa, and the right sense as a marketable force, a confident sort of crossover guy that he's really not yet been unleashed on the masses in terms of what he can do in interviews, catchphrases, talking a mile a minute, the connection to the video game culture, everything he can do. This is like the ultimate critical opportunity in beating Whittaker, but I think it could launch him into the ultimate commercial opportunity, and not just in the States, but worldwide. He gives you the feels of a young Anderson Silva in some ways, of the flashy, stylistic, the way he approaches the fights, but even on Andy's best day, I mean, he back, trust me, he back, but he couldn't speak. He couldn't talk. There was reverence and respect.
Even in Portuguese, he didn't have that same kind of.
And you had the reverence and respect for the way that he, took on the job and all that. But Adesanya has next level trash talk, fun talk. I mean, he could do it all, Luke. this really could be the next real big thing in the UFC. And if he gets by Whittaker, I'm not saying there wouldn't be any other tough challenges for him. I mean, good God, Paulo Costa, Romero's not going anywhere. But this is such a big hurdle that, if he gets by this guy, he could be ruling this division for a while.
I certainly agree with all of that. Let me just add one note about Robert Whittaker so folks don't think we're forgetting about him. Robert Whittaker is a special talent. His coach came out and said he's an improved version, essentially, of GSP. Now, you might scoff at that comparison. You might like it. Let me just lend some credibility to it. I don't know that I agree with that because I think some of that is still a little bit unproven. GSP is such a known, established, credentialed commodity. Robert Whittaker's been off for a little while, right? So that's also part of the story, too. But what I would say, Brian, is people don't realize this. In 2015, he got so good at wrestling, he went to the Australian National Championships and won it not once but twice, to the point where he actually won a seat on the wrestling team for the Commonwealth Games. The Commonwealth Games are all essentially who are all the donks who got colonized by the British, right? But it's a lot of it's countries. It's Canada, it's India, it's Australia. It's a lot. I think there's 53 different territories that compete. Now, he had to give up that seat in order to keep his title and defend it, so he had to give it away. But the point being is, who gets good enough in their off time to go and compete in freestyle wrestling because you got so good through MMA that you could take that to the sport? You know who the answer is? He didn't do it, but everyone around him said he could have. St. Pierre. St. Pierre was the guy who was taking down Division I wrestlers, who was beating everyone at their own game, even though he had never competed in it before. So is Whittaker the next St. Pierre? I guess we'll have to see. I don't know if that's really true just yet. However, that ability, and again, you can say, well, how good are the Australians at wrestling? Not so great. You know who was pretty good? The Indians are pretty good. And that's part of that tournament as well. He would have gone and competed against them. And just to be that credentialed, having never competed in it before until you got to MMA, it's astounding is really what it is. So there we go. All right.